lot of foreign investment that we've had coming into South Africa has been to latch onto those companies, those South African companies that are growing into Africa. So your typical companies are Massmart, Shoprite. It's actually predominantly the retailers, and it would include the industrials, something like a South African breweries, something like Imperial, a logistics company responsible for moving logistics into Africa. And I think that theme has actually played out pretty well. If you look at the performance of the industrials, including the banks, in fact, in that as well, who are taking big steps to moving into Africa, they have outperformed the market. And obviously, the resource sector has been the disappointing sector. So where to from here? Because those valuations have run. Retailers are not cheap. Yes, there's probably growth. How much are you prepared to pay for growth, though? So we've moved on, and my presentation now is around the importance of what's happening on the macro stage, the global macro stage, and how that's going to affect our market. And I do believe, more than ever before, what happens on the global macro stage at the moment is going to have a massive impact on our market. And the main issue coming up at the moment is the US election, and along with that is the fiscal cliff, and how world markets react to that. Because that, whichever way this election turns out, has an influence on it's all about compromise and how the politicians go into addressing the fiscal cliff. And if all those proposals from the Budget Control Act of 2011, which was set in 2011 and are due to expire at midnight on the 31st of December, I mean, that'll effectively put, it's about a 4.5% impact on GDP. So with the US growing at just over 2%, it would send the US into a recession. On the other side, we've seen very encouraging signs from China. Earlier this year, I think there was a concern that China was going to have a hard landing. We understand the implications of that on the global economy and in turn on commodities. But we're starting to see quite a few green shoots coming out of China. Manufacturing data coming out is proving to be positive. The Chinese equity market is, in fact, for the first time, trading at quite a discount to its emerging market peers. In 2007, it was trading at a 75% premium to its emerging market peers. Today, it's trading at a 25% discount. So the Chinese story to me is actually all around consumerism. The minimum Chinese wage rate is set to increase between 10 and 15% per annum. And when you've got inflation running at 2%, that's a healthy consumer. That's a healthy space to be in. And then, of course, we've got Europe. And Europe is a long-term story. It's going to be very sluggish. I think Europe is going to remain in a recession for quite some time. But having said that, the European market has actually been one of the top-performing markets over the last 3 months. And that's really because of the re-rating we've seen in the Spanish and the Italian markets. Yes, it has been off a low base, but investors are now starting to look within the market. So they're looking at Europe. There's been a big shift of money moving from the US into the European market. Interesting enough, investors are starting to look into the specific sectors in the European market. So typically, you'd expect investors to be exposed to utilities now because they're defensive. They pay a better dividend than most other companies. But in fact, fund managers are most overweight tech, and tech traditionally don't pay dividends. They have volatile earnings, so it's not the type of company you would expect investors to be looking at in this type of environment. But the reality is those defensive counters have become too expensive. The valuations are too expensive. So these international fund managers are now looking at the undervalued plays in these markets, and tech, energy, banks, diversified financials are really the sectors that are attracting inflows.